Hello, this is the Harvard Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. I appreciate all you listeners out there, and feel free to give me feedback. And I will have those links provided for you in this episode, along with the link to my Shopify. Everything is custom made that I do, and take a gander. The link will be provided for you. All right, so some of the audio platforms that I'm on Spreaker, I'm on Spotify, I'm on iHeartRadio, I'm on Pandora, and I'm on Amazon Music, just to name a few. All right, so this episode is the continuation, as I said, and I mentioned about art. So I'm going to specifically now, I'm going to get into the realm of pop art. And I'm going to give my thoughts, and then I'm going to, touch on some facts on it. All right, here we go. Okay, so me personally, when I was introduced to the aspects of pop art and that's the interesting thing about growing up in the 90s. You get, a feel of all different, it was a feel of all different aspects of culture here. And so I saw Clueless, the movie, a little bit later, but I saw the series was one of those things where you get a weekly interest if it catches your fancy there. And so stuff like Andy Warhol-esque art was pretty prevalent in the household share, And so, I thought it was very unique and interesting looking, because of the perspective. Well, because, a kid, all the flashing colors. But it was unique to me, even though as a kid, still paying attention to detail, It was just interesting, and then it was eye-catching. Excuse me, I had to take a drink. And so that caught my attention to start, taking up interest with the aspects of pop art. And so one of the most prolific figures, you can say, notorious, whatever you want to call it, was Andy Warhol. And the whole aspects of his art was to, in itself, give a glimpse to highlight why it is that people find interest and why is certain things more popular in culture than others. And, make social commentary about that. And then you saw that more and more, and specifically when you get in the 60s and then move on to the 70s and 80s and now today. People, artists, what have you, they were using that medium to take a stance towards something, to say something, for good or bad. They did it. And artists were at their forefront of doing it, and they didn't shy away from it. And Andy Warhol really didn't shy away. And so his niche was to make a whole lot of insight about our culture with pop art. And so we get thinking about Edie Sedgwick, if I'm not mistaken, not Edie Brickell. Because, my memory is fading me a little bit, because one of them is a singer. What I am is what I am. That song. I don't. Philosophy is a catch on the cereal box. Religion. You know what I'm saying. So she, say was the factory girl, was the it factor here, it was the spokesperson for this aspects of pop art. She was, I guess you could say, technically from an artistic point of view, Andy Warhol's muse, right? And so, she brought to the forefront and made it even more mainstream and more notorious with the aspects of what is this whole pop art scene about here. And so, when you break down to the midst of it, it was the beginning here of the aspects of art being seen as a means in the caliber of fashion here. And so what am I saying about this? All right, so this is my point of view, and I like for y'all to weigh in with me. Feel free to, email me. That's the best way to get to me. If you don't feel like emailing, I'm on X. I'll provide all those links for you. And then feel free to make comments on YouTube. I post on YouTube, and do that. That'll help out a lot. Now, what am I saying here? So fashion, in essence, to how it's presented, to how it's the textiles that are used, to how it's showcased on the runway, or to how it's presented in either, print form isn't so much of a thing now, but on the website, in a store, on a mannequin. It all depicts a sense of a mood, a sense of a reality to engage the consumer to buy into a fantasy here, sort of speak, right? To allure people into the mystique of what you could look like if you wear this. And I think in the essence of pop art, that's what they were trying, that's what Andy Warhol and others that followed him were doing. They were making art more, trendy here. Seen, not as seen and heard, and more mass appealing, to where people started to, who wouldn't necessarily, pay attention to art, started to take notice and say, make either good or bad, make commentary about art in itself and how it centers itself in our culture. And on the other flip hand, negative side of this, people will make the argument, and you can see that, that pop art was just one of those things that is beats the burden that makes it obvious to why we're living in the culture map that we are in. So, for instance, social media in itself, when people are having, posting things or things are trending, most of the time, when you get in the aspect, Pinterest was really good about it. It was really at the runner of that, with using photographs, posting photographs or liking photographs, because it enates a sense of whimsy and whatever was the category, of interest. And so that's what people are innating when they Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and so forth. MySpace, going. I'm dating myself here, but it doesn't matter. So, posting things to innate a sense of an imagery of being the high life here, or the here and now, don't you wish sort of mentality. And you can see how that was on its cusp with pop art, getting that fleeting thing, that famous, being notable is a allure, an addiction. It's something that is sought after by everybody, whether you want to admit that or not. And it's fleeting, it's fading. And, we want to show you here with our art, we want to tell you, but take it away. And even though you like it, one of those things, are you really part of the problem? That mixed sort of thing when art is supposed to be something that is enjoyed, that is something that is of great accomplishment. But using art as a way of being trendy and as a way of making social commentary, that's something completely another thing within itself. All right, with all this said, I'm going to just get in the meat and potatoes and talk about the facts and close everything up. Here we go. Okay, so here are some facts, and then I'm going to go into an article that talks about 15 very interesting facts about pop art. All right, so pop art is an art movement that emerged in the mid-50s, reaching its peak in the 60s. And it was primarily a reaction against the seriousness of abstraction, expressionism of art. So again, the aspects of going against being pretentious with art. So it began in the United Kingdom, but gained significant momentum in the U.S., where artists like Andy Warhol, as I was mentioning, Jasper John, Roy Lichtenstein, and Klaus Oldenburg began prominent figures. One of the defining characteristics of pop art is the use of image and icons from popular culture. Again, with the aspects of Andy Warhol using celebrity and glitterati, and the glitterati around celebrity and the fading dimension of that. And then, going in the aspects of cartoon characters with other pop art. Not cartoon, comic characters and, comic aspects of the onomatopoeias and everything, the aspects of pop art with other facets that is centered around pop art. All right, so such as celebrities, commercial products, and everyday objects. So the movement sought to bridge the gap between low and high art by incorporating elements of mass culture into fine art. So pop art often employs techniques like screen printing. And screen printing, I know from personal experience, I use screen printing. It can be a very tedious process, specifically if you're thinking about the aspects of when they were using screen printing. And I had experience where, so for instance, think about it as if from this, who don't know, and those who know, you know what I'm talking about, where you have to create an image and then specifically if you don't have, if using the chemicals, which is daunting and can be hazardous to your health. But if you don't have, quick UV light or quick dry or instant dry paints it can be a long process when you make your design either by hand, drawing by hand, or by computer with illustration, Photoshop, or what have you. You get it laid out, you get it right, and you get the dimensions right. You size it right with measuring it out exactly how you want to, and think about layering on top of layering if you're creating a poster, or if you're creating something like a t-shirt, and you got all that laid out, and then you lay out color one at a time, depending on the process you're using, so forth. And then you have to have all these screens laid out in the sun if you don't have the process or the convenience of instantly drying paints or UV light to instantly dry it. That can be very tedious, if you don't have the patience to do it. And just imagine art being created out of this. That's something that's mind-blowing. So pop art is known for its accessibility and relatability, and it reflects the material realities of people's everyday lives and often appeals to an emotional and experimental level. This art form continues to be popular and influential, inspiring contemporary artists and designers across various creative fields. The movement is credited with challenging traditional art standards and redefining what constitutes art, making it one of the most recognizable forms of modern art. So pop art influence can still be seen in modern design, including web and graphic design. Yes, it is, and it remains a significant part of a cultural discourse. All right, so the movement is credited with challenging traditional art standards and redefining what is, as I said. Oh, I'm sorry, I read that already. So pop art began in the 50s, as I said, in the UK, and it was more prominent and it ended in the 60s. So pop art is accessible and relatable, and it continues to inspire. All right, so here we go with 15 pop art facts that are very interesting. It means popular art, pop art, to start out with. So pop art is short for popular art, just like how pop music is short for popular music. This can actually mean a lot of things. After all, if something is popular, that means lots of people like it. In the case of pop art, though, it was all about what influenced the artist. So pop art is all about pop culture. So, of course, it goes without saying. So pop culture is meaning that what you enjoy in everyday and when they mundanery, I guess you can say. So in this instance, think about blockbuster films, hidden music, TV shows everyone loves to watch, fashion trends, and the products we buy and our everyday aspects of life. Pop art takes a lot of inspiration from these things, which was very different from the traditional idea of art. Classical art is often about things that most people cannot relate to or do not experience. So portraits of kings and queens or scenes from the Bible, or epic historical battles, for example. Pop art is all about taking things we look at in everyday life and making them into art. It was a response to a new world. The world was ever-changing in the 20th century, and one of the big changes was how people entertained themselves. Cinema became popular first, and later on, television became more mainstreamed, and video games became ways to entertain people in everyday life too. So people also had more spending money, and they were able to buy more products than ever before. So for them to buy, so did the advertising industry started to become more prevalent out of this aspect. So pop art reflected the way that they were consuming media and how they were buying products and how they were being sold. New York was the hub of pop art. Lots of pop artists gathered in New York City to produce their art. And you can understand why, because New York is the cusp of culture, in essence. So for a long time, it's been a world hub of culture, music, art, and also advertising. So Times Square is the home of some of the biggest and gaudiest billboards in the world. It all started out in the UK, even though some of the best-known pop artists were American. The movement actually had its roots in Britain in the 50s. British artists like David Hockney, Richard Hamilton, and Edward Papalazzi were creating amazing, colorful works of art that referred to pop culture. Edward Papalazzi was even the first to use the word pop in his art in a collage that was made in 1947. Andy Warhol is the most famous pop artist. Even if you never heard of his name, you probably seen his work. Andy Warhol was an American artist born in 1928. Those who know, but if you don't, this is a little bit background about him. So he started off doing illustrations for fashion magazines, but later moved into making his own with art. His most famous work are the Campbell soup cans, which is 32 paintings of Campbell branded soup tins and silk screening of famous movie stars. So both Campbell Soup and Marilyn Monroe were pop culture icons, and the repetition of the images makes a point about how we consume mass production and culture. So Andy Warhol was also famous for his lavish parties. He threw them in the New York studio, which was called the Factory, as I was mentioning before, because he believed his process of making art was like factory making products. Roy Lichtenstein was another famous pop artist. Another very famous artist from the movement was Roy Lichtenstein. He was born in 1923, and he was based in New York City. His work was inspired by comic books. As I was saying, with wham, bam, pop, onomatopoeias and everything. Even though pop art started in the 50s, it had its heyday in the 60s. A lot of celebrities associated with the 60s hung out with Andy Warhol. Pop artists made album covers for artists like the Beatles and the Velvet Underground. And Dennis Hopper was one of the most influential actors, but he was a part of that movement too. So it was expensive. Even though the images in pop art can be so simple, they often sell for a lot of money. So one of the Marilyn Monroe paintings sold for $195 million in 2022. Roy Lichtenstein was not far behind. One of his masterpieces sold for $160 million in 2017. Wow. So it was bold and bright. It was meant to be direct. One of the things about pop art is that it was not very subtle. You don't have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what it meant. Had its roots in early art movement. You might have noticed that pop art uses stuff that already exists to make a new piece of art. There were women artists too, which, it's one of those things where, okay, when you get into aspects of art and movement, where, you got to see for what it is and not, it's one of those things of the circumstance with art and what it's saying about the aspects of women and art and was it being repressive to women when it's not to say that was the circumstance. It's something to be said about that too. So it's still going on today, and it was an international movement. So that was really, so this reaches the inner harbor light. I'd like to know what you all think. So I think one of the most unique things about pop art was that it had imaging that was very related to people's lives that they were experiencing at the time. And then, with that, a lot of people had a lot to say and had a lot of commentary about art in itself and its placement in society because they had no choice. Oh, yeah, I'm familiar with that. I see soup cans. And what's your commentary about us and how we live our society, what we like, what we don't like? Are you being, okay, yeah, I agree with that. Okay, I don't agree with that. Just, that's some, you're far removed. It's not all, sometimes not like the saying goes, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, It's quite interesting. So feel free to reach out to me and let me know what you think about this episode. All right, so reaches the end of the harboring light. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care. Bye-bye for now.